Most people don't realize how much their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making billions, pulling details about you from public records and the internet, and then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. It's why you get endless robocalls and why ads seem to follow you everywhere. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance. All backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might sell just credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of it, together, at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/remove. Protect yourself now at aura.com/remove.
In a world where we are full of anxiety and overwhelm and constantly going 100 miles an hour, what would happen to your life if you could figure out how to get back to baseline, to be regulated, to be able to take all of the things that are happening and navigate life the way that you're meant to be, not in the way that we are in the world that we live in today, which, as someone who is impacted by it, I can tell you with certainty, learning to be able to cope with the anxiety that comes up in my day-to-day life as an entrepreneur, business owner, coach, and podcast host is something that I'm always working on. And I'm super excited for our conversation today with our amazing guest, Sophia Tortarini, because we are going to dive deeply into that. Sophia, my friend, how are you today? Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. And it's an honor being on your show. And how are you? I'm really good, actually.
I'm wonderful. I'm excited to do this with you because, I think about this a lot. There's this thing that we exist in this echo chamber of society where we are bathed in anxiety today. And so I'm curious, before we jump in and we walk that path, why should anyone listen to our conversation today? What are they going to get out of the time that we spend together?
So let me answer it a little bit differently first, and then I'll answer your question. So let me push back a little bit. So if you survived something that you weren't supposed to survive, you know that feeling in your body, right? You walk into the room, you read a message, or someone or some certain tone, and the body responds before your mind can catch up, right? There's this tightness in your chest, your stomach drops, something inside of you is racing for an impact that's not coming. That's not anxiety. That is a survival pattern. And your nervous system learned it, and it saved you. And nobody told you that the danger was over. So why they should listen to me? Because I've built a method called the pattern override method. And because that's exactly what it does. It overrides the survival pattern at the level it actually lives, which is the nervous system. Not by talking about your past or by changing something in the future, by actually changing what exactly is happening in real time in your body right here, right now, in the present. And the reason that this matters is because this pattern actually cost me my career, and it almost cost my life. And if you want later on, I can explain the story. So I know how to do this because I work from the inside out, and I literally mean it. It's from my own experience. So I hope that answered your question.
Well, let's dive into it. Patterns tend to be behavioral based on experiences that we've had, right? So anytime you show me someone's pattern, I could sit with someone and by their mannerisms, by if they do or do not have eye contact, the way that they move, the way they chew their food, the way they react to noises, the way they walk, the way they're in the gym, the way they make love, like all of these things, you can kind of tell someone's pattern, right? And so some of these things we're born with. I think maybe it's genetic, and other things probably more so are inherited, right? And so you have this really interesting conversation about nature versus nurture. But I think to be trapped in the pattern of constantly being in anxiety, fear, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, like that doesn't feel normative to me, right? So how do we decipher and know the difference between this is a pattern and it's something that is a survival mechanism and this is anxiety? Like, is there a way we can kind of look at the difference of those two things?
Okay, so first of all, most of the anxiety is actually a pattern. There are a few, I mean, if you have a tiger right in front of you right here, right now, that is a legitimate situation of pure anxiety, right? But that's not what's happening in real time most of the time. It's when we actually become small, when we get quiet, when we're scanning unconsciously the room, when we have a default behavior that we don't want. That's when you know it's a pattern. And you actually don't feel good about it. When you go home later on, you feel like you messed it up and you beat yourself up. So unless there's a legitimate situation, and most of the time, most of us are in our heads. And we learn these patterns, and all patterns we know get learned actually starting from the womb, the first trimester, not when you're outside the womb. You're picking up from your mother, including your father, certain behaviors so you can adapt to the current environment you're coming in. I mean, there's some other patterns we can go a little deeper that are coming from other lifetimes, but we're going to focus and make it real for the person here today, right? So these patterns get learned from your first trimester till about 7. I like to extend the age because some people mature a little different. So the age cutoff doesn't really matter, but till about, let's say 12 or 13. And now they become your default behavior. But as you grow later, you're realizing you're having challenges.
Yeah. And that's what's so interesting is when I think about that, my mother was in a very abusive relationship, right? And it ends up being this thing where she leaves my father. There's lots of drugs, there's lots of alcohol, there's lots of who knows, right? And the only thing I do know is, well, that information and data that she was bringing in obviously carried over into my life, right? And into my siblings' lives, and into, we look at this from a genetic perspective, it's literally in your DNA. And so it's like there's something about that where if you can at least acknowledge that, because the research proves it. And in fact, it's funny because as you were saying that, a few years ago, I had Dr. Gabor Mate on the show, and we literally talked about that. We were having this conversation about that being a reality. So then what do you do with that information, right? Because there's this period of time where it serves you, it's protective, and then it's not. So what starts to happen, and how do you, I guess really first, before you do something with the information, how do you even know or understand if the patterns you're being impacted by are positive or negative?
It's how it's affecting your life, right? So I can give you one of my first examples, then I'll give you my second one. So I had been preparing for this interview, a high-end position, right? And I grew up in the home, I'll tell you more details later, but pretty much that speaking up was not safe, right? So that's one of the patterns, because the people who were supposed to protect me were actually the abusers that I needed protection from. And that was the setup. There was both physical and emotional abuse. So here I am going through life. I'm preparing for this high-end job. I had done 7 interviews. And by the 8th interview, internally, my hands would go, my chest would tighten, my hands would go cold, my thoughts were racing. And it wasn't about my qualifications, because on paper I was great, on performance I was great, is whether they would pick up what I was carrying. And that anxiety somehow leaked through. And up to the 7th interview, every sentence they said, "You're exactly what we're looking for." Now, this was a really high-end position that it was only me and one more person. And by the 8th interview, they called me on the phone. I didn't get it. While I was on the phone, I realized that the person who showed up in that interview wasn't the true me. wasn't the capable me. That's when I first identified that I was acting from smallness. And while I was walking home, because I was actually walking home that night, I didn't feel defeated. I actually felt robbed. That's something I had prepared for all my life. I didn't get it because of this anxiety. And it turned out I was actually more qualified than the other person. So that's when I knew that is a pattern. And then there's a second story that happened, and I'm realizing all these childhood patterns, because up to this point, we learn when we're climbing the corporate ladder to push through, just override it. But there's so much that the body can take. And then I got hit with another scenario. And that's when I realized, okay, this is not me. And it was depriving me of, well, in this case, it deprived me of my financial success. And then, of course, you go through beating yourself up and how come this happened to me and whatever the mind creates. But the second one almost cost my life. And that was a real reckoning for me.
One of the things I think happens a lot, and I've experienced this obviously, is it feels so normal until it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And maybe those aren't necessarily rock bottom moments in terms of the traditional sense. Right. But there are these really big, wait a second, I need to take inventory of what's actually going on in my life. It makes me think of Gay Hendricks' book, The Big Leap. And he talks about this idea of this upper limitation, right? And this place where we get stuck, the place of the self-sabotage, the place of the anxiety, the place of not giving yourself the things that you need. And it always comes back to that root, right? And you see this in high performers. Like if you weren't a high performer, you don't make it to 7 or 8 interviews, right? But high performers tend to get stuck in kind of these invisible loops. Mm-hmm. And I would have to assume, you tell me if I'm wrong, there's probably a ton of overthinking happening there, a bunch of self-imposed pressure, perfectionism, all of these things that tend to exist for people who they're stuck, right? And I had this happen to me when I was young. It's so funny as you were telling this story. When I was 19 and 20, I had spent 2 years applying for every single insurance company in America because my best friend at the time, he had gotten a job working for a major insurance company. He had made it out of where we had grew up. He was doing well. And I was like, oh, that must be the path. And what was really interesting is I was just bathed in anxiety every single time I walked into one of those interviews. Every time. Because like you would wasn't allowed to speak up or have a voice or have authority, very different than I am today. And it wasn't until I actually I distinctly remember this. I was going into the interview for the position I actually ended up getting, working for this Fortune 10 insurance company. It took me 2 years. But on that day, I remember driving to the interview and I was like, I just don't give a fuck anymore. And it was so freeing because it was like, wait a second. What if I'm the upper limit here? What if it is me and my decision-making and thinking that's causing this? So I'm curious. So a lot of people are listening and they're like, yes, sometimes I've sabotaged or I have these anxiety moments or I see myself in these stories. Okay, but now what? Right? So if we can acknowledge it, well, what do we do with it from there?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, what we've described up to this point is a nervous system behavior, right? And what most people try to do is override it either by forcing through, analyzing, or taking mental action. What if we could actually go, and I know you've had a lot of people on this subject and they're accurate. What if we went into the body to actually take the pattern out of the body? Because that's what it is. And let's discuss how it actually happens. So first, there's a bodily sensation. That's the first thing that happens. Then the body records it as an emotion. Then there's the thought and the story. That's actually the proper sequence, right? Because the body knows before the mind. There have been many tests that verify that. So we're trying to solve it with our head, and we're looping with the affirmations, and we're reading the books, and we know there's the thermostat or the upper ceiling, and we can never really break free till we actually go inside the body. And there's a reason for it, because we have three brains. We have the neocortex, the limbic brain. That's the one that produces all the chemistry, and then the cerebellum. And when anxiety comes up, what is the first thing that we know from neuroscience is your neocortex goes online to see the worst case scenario. So if we reverse engineer it and keep on giving a signal to the body that, okay, the alarm is going on, which we learned maybe the first trimester, maybe you learned it whenever you learned it, to keep on giving an opposite signal and keep on interrupting it, sooner or later, that signal, those neurons are going to be cut off. Now, and I'll go through the process, as this is mostly what I do. When we interrupt the pattern, finally, we get to the point, we actually have to replace it with something else, something positive, because the mind is a predictive machine. And it always, based on the past, is scanning to predict the future. So we want to use the body, and we want to use some simple techniques, because when we make it very complicated, you're going to get overwhelmed. And all it needs is 90 seconds. And I'll explain why 90 seconds. So we know once the bodily sensation and the chemistry gets produced, let's say it's fear, there's going to be chemistry from the limbic brain flooding the body. Your digestion may stop, whatever it is. Let's say it's a fear response, right? So your pupils are going to dilate. Maybe you start sweating. And that chemistry, we know from, I think her last name is Jolte, Jill Jolte, lasts 90 seconds to 2 minutes. If there's no thinking to reinforce the loop. And most of us don't know that, because we get into this loop, and this anxiety from 90 seconds to 2 minutes now has lasted half an hour because we keep on feeding it. And if we actually right in the moment interrupt it, now over a period of time, we can unwire that process. So
yeah, and I've experienced that in my own life, right? Where I've had these moments where, and I even call it looping, because that's really what it is. You're in it over and over. It's the same thing. You get in a fight with your husband or wife. You're like, oh, that motherfucker, right? You're looping, right? You have a problem with an employee. I should fire them. You're looping, right? I always tell people this because it's something I had to learn. So when I was coaching for many, many years, and thousands of people come through my programs, I would always say the peace is in the pause. And we are so reactive all the time that we forget that we have to calm our nervous system. That's why I try not to make really hard decisions. But honestly, if I can, within the week that I find out that I have to make the hard decision. I really try to sleep on it a few nights, get a couple gym sessions in, get some meditations in, get some journaling in. Because I used to be so reactive immediately. And I realized, especially when I was younger, I would just burn everything down that way. And so, well, what does that end up doing? Well, hell, that just makes you way more anxious than you were to begin with. Right. And I think people always hear, calm yourself, and they've heard the 90-second rule, and they hear, take the walk or the meditation, but it's actually within the practice of doing it that your life actually changes. And I think that's actually the hardest part of this, because you talk about simplification and making this easy. What was it like for you? You start to get into understanding yourself better. Was this a path where you were like, okay, I'm going to do therapy. I got a coach. I'm reading books, Tony Robbins, one of my programs, I don't know what it is, but what were the things in the beginning when after acknowledgement, you have to have action?
Okay.
Right. And so I'm curious, what did you start doing at first?
Okay. So I did a lot of stuff. And I'm going to be very honest, because there's a huge traumatic experience before. This is not, I had insight one moment and then I was fine, right? So this is for me how it worked. I tried everything, when I mean everything, for over 16 years. And I literally went broke. So I did CBT, EMDR, body experience, hypnosis, psyche, healing codes, all of it. There's more to it. And I didn't just dabble. What I did, I made a decision at the time, 30 sessions minimum per modality. I gave every method a chance, and I kept on getting defeated. And this wasn't a privilege. I ended up it was a financial reckoning for me. Why? Because my nervous system was running me to the ground and nothing was working. I had to find a solution. So what happened afterwards, because I had read Dr. Joe's Dispenzas, I couldn't even meditate for the life of me, even though I had been to his events. What I started doing is which at the time I thought was ridiculous, I started doing EFT. And after EFT, once I started, I had a very good practitioner, and I'll explain, not the EFT you see on the internet, literally connecting with the body, slowly breathing and connecting to the body and doing the EFT very slowly. Then later, the meditation worked because I had turned on the signal to the body. I'm safe to be connected inside the body. And then the psychedelics worked, and the EMDR that didn't work for me before worked, and the hypnosis worked for me, which in the beginning, none of them worked. So for me, the favorites were, well, obviously I started EFT, Dr. Joe's work, his neuroscience framework, connecting with your future self was perfect after the EFT. And then all those other modalities, because EMDR is a little different than EFT, it actually reprocesses the memories versus EFT releases the emotional charge. So the two of them with the other, then it started working. And all it took after the 16 years was 18 months. Once I was safe in the body, it took 18 months.
Yeah. Yep. I resonate with that entirely, because I when I was 29, 30 and I moved to Portland, Oregon from Indiana, it was so I could walk that same path. And, I'd walked into looking at what I was about to have to do as this very much any means necessary thought process. And like you, I tried every modality. You name it, I tried it. There wasn't anything off the table. And some things worked, obviously, and some things didn't. And that's kind of the nature of it. But it wasn't until I was probably like, I want to say 2 years-ish in. So I'm like 31, heading towards 32, that it really started to take hold, because I'd spent a lot of time getting my brain and my body reconnected. A lot of time. I mean, and I think that was through the journaling, that was through the meditation, through the group therapies, that was through what actually was the most important thing, which I actually don't talk about enough, I don't think, was through massage. So I must have gone, and there was this amazing woman who I spent every Tuesday and Friday with for 2 years in her massage studio. And it went from my body was so stiff. She would touch me with like the slightest touch, and it would feel like a hammer on my skin at first. I mean, she'd be like, I'm not touching you. I'm like, that's how tight I am. Mm-hmm. That's how much in fight or flight I am. That's how much my body has protected itself from physical touch from other human beings because of all of the abuse in childhood. And so 2 years of going and going and going and going, the myofascial release, the jaw releases, the TMJ release, all of the things were happening. And then one day, because I live in Portland, so we walk everywhere, ride a bicycle, and, which I kind of miss at times. And I'm walking from Hollywood district up to where I live on 79th. And this is about a 25-ish minute walk, depending on how fast you walk. And when I was down in Hollywood, I just finished, or this is backwards. So I was walking from her office up on 79th down to Hollywood where my therapist was. And this was right after a session. And I get into the therapist, and this was an EMDR with this amazing woman as well. And for probably 15 years at that time, everywhere I had walked with keys between my knuckles, right? This very like defensive posture, always hyper vigilant every time I'm outside. And here's what's wild. I'm 6'4", 225 pounds. I've been doing martial arts my whole life. People don't mess with me. You know what I mean? But because I was never safe as a child and I never felt safe in my body, I did that. After that massage session, for whatever reason that day, and that EMDR session since, and that was over a decade ago, I've never done that one time. And so you talk about getting into the body, and I'm like, yep, that's the thing that you have to do. And I think about this and I go, okay, those are real tools. But why are people how do I phrase this? Why do people keep repeating the same patterns even though they have the tools? Like, we do all this work and then you come back and you're right back to where you were. How do you solve that problem?
Okay, so I'll be very direct. So a lot of us get the awareness and they think the awareness is the problem, is the solution. The awareness is the basement. The awareness is not enough. I wish I could tell you it was. I can only speak for myself. The next time, so you have to...
Most people don't realize how much their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making billions, pulling details about you from public records and the internet, and then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. It's why you get endless robocalls and why ads seem to follow you everywhere. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance. All backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might sell just credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of it, together, at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/remove. Protect yourself now at aura.com/remove.
See the pattern, you have to interrupt the pattern, and you have to rewire the pattern. That's the process, right? It's like you have to find out the software program that's causing the problem. You have to interrupt it, you have to delete it, and then you have to rewire. When we've been disconnected from the body, the bodily sensations do not feel good. And as children, we disassociated, and that was our safety. And it actually verified it was our protection. It was actually good when we did it as kids. And somehow there's this belief out there that it's going to feel fully comfortable. What feels comfortable is after the release, is you get the bliss. I even had experiences, this is going to sound crazy, where I'm in meditation and all of a sudden there's this new feeling, and it's feeling like anxiety, yet it's not anxiety because there's nothing happening, because it's so unfamiliar to me that my body is recording it as danger in the beginning to realize it's not. It's a new emotion as you're elevating up. And the good news is I know that. So I don't sit with it very long. I'm training myself to sit with it. Then eventually afterwards you get even bliss if you can go through it. But most people either stop at the first step. Okay, I know I have a sabotage problem. I can tell you 6 ways how I do it. But they don't know how to interrupt it, or even if they interrupt it, they stop on the rewiring. It's like baking a cake. You're going to have to do the whole thing. You put the sequence in the right order, you put it in the oven. Well, now you have to cook it. It's not going to come out. And if you do the wrong order, it's not going to work. Now, I like to listen to Robert Edward Grant, who's discovered the reality, how it works. So he says there's many ways to get to where you want to go. But there's only one way that is the most direct and efficient. Mathematically, he's proved that. And so if you learn these modalities and you put them in the right order, you're going to get there faster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, I love the analogy there, because as you were saying that, I was just thinking to myself, if you just threw flour and cocoa and salt and butter and cream or milk or what, I don't know how to make a cake.
Yes.
But you just threw all that stuff into the oven in a pan, that is not a cake. And in fact, I would argue it's probably not even edible, you know? And so I think that's a really, really good point, because I think people want to skip the process. You know, one of the things that I had created when I was still coaching was this 18-week program. And it was like, it worked like clockwork. And I could always tell. It was really funny, because by week 4, everyone always asked me the same question. And I could always tell who was doing the work, because if by the time we were on week 4, they hadn't asked me that question, I realized they weren't doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
But this is, okay, so let's talk about this for a second, because this made me think of something as we were going through this. Right. So you get the recipe, you want cake, you know, I want cake, damn it. You get the recipe, you don't make the cake, right? People want to shortcut this. They don't want to do this work. How do we, you can't make anyone do anything. Look, I've coached 3,000 people. I can tell you immediately the people who will be successful and who won't. And it's always been the people who are willing to do the thing that makes them uncomfortable.
Correct. And the order matters. So a lot of times, yes. I'm an EFT practitioner, as you already know, and I incorporate breath, and which I think is important. There's various reasons. I won't go to the details, but starting with a regulated breath is going to get you in more awareness, right? So a lot of people go on the tapping script. They tap generically. They're not connected with the body. They've read the marketing. You can tap it away in 5 minutes. It doesn't work that way. And so they don't do it. So you hit the first one. They don't want to connect to feel that uncomfortable bodily sensation. What I can say from experience, it doesn't last forever. It actually will last maybe 5-10 minutes. If you don't resist it, the same way that chemistry was 90 seconds, it's going to be about 2 minutes if you do not allow the stories. But the thing is, we've been all wired to resist it. And you said a lot of, you can tell the people who give up. So we usually give up a lot of times on the third stage, where we know what we do know and how to get out of it. But then we don't want to take the action. So Dr. Joe likes to say, from thinking to doing and to being, you actually have to go to the being part. That is the feeling part, and you get the reward afterwards. You don't get it the moment you're in the fire. You get it afterwards. And we've been taught we want immediate gratification. I mean, that's what I was taught too. But having been on this side, this is how it works. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is how it's worked for me. And this is what gets results. And when I see results with clients, that's what it is. And I've seen some really, really good results. The people who do the uncomfortable sensation. I have a woman who's paralyzed, and certain memories are coming up, and she's finally gone on the treadmill. And she was so desperate, and she's willing to trust, and she follows the sequence, and she's disciplined, and she doesn't get it right then and there. It's a week or two later, because paralysis is a little different. The body responds a little different. You don't get it right away. But she went from a cane to going on a treadmill, and now she's on an incline. But she's been uncomfortable. But isn't that better? The joy of and she's young. She's so young. So now she's going to be able to go to the world and physically walk. She's actually walking. I mean, she has a gait issue a little bit, but you can't say she's paralyzed anymore.
Yeah, I look at I've read a lot of Joe's work over the years, watched tons of his podcasts, have dinner with him a couple times. And the thing that's really interesting about him is it's not all the work that he's talked about, the quantum and all that, sure, whatever. But honestly, that stuff doesn't resonate with me that much. I mean, I get it. I can kind of logic myself into it. But the thing that I always just sit in, and I think about this every day, is like, how do you break the habit of being yourself?
Mhm.
Like, that's such a wild concept, right? Because you look at this, okay, if we're starting this conversation in this path of anxiety and patterns, and you make the decision to acknowledge it, to start taking the action, doing the work, sitting in the discomfort, following the recipe, well, now you get to this place where it's like, okay, well, how do I continue to perform without anxiety? By shifting that internal baseline daily. Right. That's kind of where I start to look at it. I go, what do I have to do today to be the me that I want to be, not the me that I was baked in the womb as, right? So I see this regression happen with people a lot, right? Where they'll have this, I call it the Tony Robbins syndrome. I love Tony. He's great. I've done Platinum Partnership. I'm a huge fan, right? The Tony Robbins syndrome, to me, I would love to have him on the show one day to ask him this question, is to look at people who they leave that event and on the backside for a week, they're on fire. And then they're right back to who they are. And one of the things that I know that you've been able to do, you've been able to create longevity, right? I know that you've been into a lot of these spaces and done a tremendous amount of this work. How do we stay in this body that we want to have on the daily basis?
There's a couple of things. In some areas I haven't been as good, but for the health aspect.
Sure, you're a human.
Yeah.
Same.
Because I've done a lot of Joe events, right? So, and I wasn't healing in the beginning right away. So, right, we started with a concept: your personality creates your personal reality, how you think, act, and feel. But when I look at Dr. Joe and I look at Tony Robbins, because I've done just the simple Tony Robbins stuff, there is a discipline and a commitment. Now, if you ever notice Tony, he uses his body to change his state on a regular basis. He is relentless. Now, Dr. Joe, on another aspect, he has his own method. He uses his body so relentlessly. He actually has a concept that in the beginning I didn't understand, but now I get it. You need to overcome your body, environment, and time. So you don't surrender to your body and you keep on having your vision. Do you fail? Of course you fail in the beginning, but it's this commitment with a long-term vision and the rewards. Now, Tony has, he calls it the Dickens method. Well, the Dickens method is actually based on one of the old methods of Dr. David Hawkins. He called it the worst case scenario. So you imagine yourself, and I actually did that before I knew Tony Robbins. There was a situation that I was terrified. It was during the pandemic. I was terrified about the scenario. And I asked my practitioner, here's the method. Take me to the worst case scenario and take me to my deathbed. And I was like shivering with fear. And I tapped through it. And then eventually I moved through it. And the worst case scenario never happened. I actually stayed in my power and I refused everything that was my way because I was going to protect my own body. And that's what I did. Now, I haven't been successful in every area of my life using the method, but in this case, I remember it very clearly. And I had so much regret. I saw my life being ill and dying alone. And I literally, he had me sit with it and amplify it. I physically got sick in my body that we eventually created a shift.
As you're saying this, the thing that comes to mind for me is that it's so much about this journey of visualization. I mean, and creating the reality that you want to have. And it's interesting because there's been so many times in my life that I've had deja vu because I had already seen it. And here's the fucked up part. That also includes the bad things, right? I'm a catastrophizer by nature because it's, my superpower
Yes.
to look for
Yeah.
the worst case, right? I think most people can tend to do that. But for me, it was just like, it's ramped up times 10, right? So I had to learn this idea about creating this identity shift to get from reactive to decisive and calm and being able to be a high performer in the vision of being like, this is where I want to go. I want to write these books, to do this podcast, to be on billboards in Times Square, to be on stages in front of 10,000 people, to coach all these people, to do blah, 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 right? I mean, all the things. And it was so much about this rewiring. If people want to get into this other place in their life, what is it that they really need to do in order to shift their identity? Like, what is the biggest thing that you see once they're in their body, they're more connected, but now they start to see the vision? Because I this is what happened to me. I want to create just a touch more context. I distinctly remember there was this moment of time and me thinking like, oh, that's the path forward, but being in combat with myself in the present moment. And then I came up with this idea many years ago, this moniker called No Excuses, Just Results. And effectively what that means is it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what's happening. Move forward, go to that place and do that thing. And that worked really well for me because I rewired all of who I am by proving to myself that I could be someone different. So for people who are listening, how do you help them get to that place?
Okay, so I have a little tiny, pretty much the same, a little tiny different approach. So every pattern has chemistry that's in the body, right? That's actually what creates the tightness every time. And I do believe in quantum physics. And the second law of thermodynamics says energy can never be created or destroyed. It can only be transmuted. So my preferred choice is once we identify and we keep on doing the interrupt, I usually take them to the younger self. I don't re-traumatize them. I don't need to hear the story because, what fires together, wires together. All I need to know is after we have the younger self in the protected state, what is it that they're feeling? Where they're feeling it? What is the belief? So once I neutralize that chemistry, and most of the time, most of the people, including myself, because I do this on myself, I feel the energy moving. Then what we do is we either give a voice to the younger self. So if it was an unfair situation, the voice is given. And then we ask the younger self, how would they like to play out? So we repattern that and it's called matrix reimprinting. I was trained from someone else. And my version is called hacking reality because the trainer was different, but it's the same thing. And you rewire and reimprint that memory with the emotion. The key here is to produce new chemistry. So if you want to change your life, you have to produce not a mental charge, an emotional charge. It's the emotional charge in the body. And then what I do, the step that you suggested, I actually future pace them. They connect to their future self, and now they re-embody the future self. So I can tell you from personal experience, I was physically abused, right? So I have, I'm scanning the room. The person who abused me, I've actually cleared those memories. It seems that they belong to someone else. I was able to see him in person and give him a hug, not in the closed environment, and let it go. Now, it took me a while. It didn't happen overnight. But those memories, if you were to ask me to describe them, they don't have a charge. And when I was doing my clearing, I did not describe what was happening. It's like they belong to someone else. They're not me anymore.
What do you think keeps people from rejecting that future self? How do we get them to accept that they can be that person?
Okay. So when you, let's assume, I want to give you another scenario before I answer. Let's assume they're doing some visualization about the future self and they're trying to feel the joy of the future. If the body is seeped with failure, there's an opposite frequency, an opposite emotion that they can't actually feel. So they get frustrated. They can't actually feel their future. Now, in order to answer your question, in order for them to get to the future self, they have to clear any emotion and any belief that's holding them hostage. Because the truth of the matter, even though I don't always believe it, but it is true. I mean, I do believe it, but sometimes I doubt it. You can become and be anything you want. Your past doesn't matter. I mean, that is the truth. But we've been conditioned that we can't. And I think if people can trust and find a coach, the coaches, you and I as coaches, don't have a magic formula. We're not doing the healing. We're actually mirroring back to them their best potential. And if they're willing to trust us because we've been through some experiences, there is no reason why they can't get there. And I'm sure you had the same experience. I've had some students that the student is better than the teacher. And then that motivates me even better. I've had some clients that they go through it no matter. And I said, why am I getting stuck?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, absolutely. And I think a lot of times it's, for me, and I'm on the backside of the beginning, I should say, of a hiatus from coaching after doing it for a very long time. I'm a big proponent of find the right person for you, by the way. Let's be very clear about that, because there are definitely people, as I coached over the years, we would be in, our discovery calls, transformation calls, whatever. And I'd be like, you're not going to work in this program because I'm not the right fit for you. Let me recommend you to somebody. But for me, the thing that I always saw was if I could sit with someone and I could help them understand that they are only a matter of decisions away from a different life, then I could always predict their success. And it was the people who would fight it. They would reject it. If I would hear the, I don't knows or maybes, it's like, you've got to be so fucking committed to the idea that you can transform, that the coach, the people that you're working with, they're to liaise the experience with you, right? I always looked at it as like, I'm a liaison here. I'm giving you a toolkit and some path, but like ultimately I'm just here to be like, hey, try that or do this or walk over there. And I think that's the experience that I always had and still do have, because I have coaches right now, because that's the way I operate. It's just what I do. And when I'm with them and they're like, hey, did you do this? And I'm like, oh yeah, good point. I should go do that thing. And that's how I stay in it. So, one of the things that I love about this conversation is you're literally doing that thing where you go, I'm going to go serve the person that I used to be. And I think that carries so much weight in a world where, like you said, marketers are really great at, hey, 5 minutes to heal your life tapping. And like, that's bullshit. It doesn't work. What works is connecting with the people who have walked the path. So I'm curious, before I ask you my last question, where can everybody find you? Where can everybody learn more? And tell us a little bit more about how you help people transform their lives.
So first of all, I'm on all social media, and the handle is tapintourbestself.com or tapintourbestself. And I offer a clarity call complimentary. I do offer 2 master classes, and I do teach one of Dr. Joe Dispenza's courses. It's a neuroscience course, Change Your Mind, Create New Results, because I combine that with a 90-day program with EFT to actually heal, because we need the neuroscience and then we actually need to address the body. So that's where they can find me. They can shoot me an email. I write a blog. I do some videos on YouTube. I really like to help people because I feel everybody can heal and it doesn't matter where you are. I also don't want them to waste 16 years like I did. I literally, before I found what actually works, which you have a similar story, I don't want to, I don't want them to waste 16 or 20 years to get to the right place. And I'm who I am. I don't hide my story, and I'm happy to support them. But I agree with you. There has to be a commitment, because a lot of people say, of course you meet the client where they are, or the person, but if they keep on having resistance and not doing and not doing and not doing and not doing, at some point you need to bring it to their awareness.
At what stage? I actually had another question, because as I was thinking about it, what stage are you helping people in their journey? Like, where is the ideal time that somebody is picking up the phone? What time nobody does that anymore. What time in somebody's life are they like, hey, I need to go work with Sophia, things are just not right?
Usually people hit me when they're far gone for whatever reason. I don't get that. I get some early on, but usually the people who are in my age group is when they're in complete despair. Either they're wanting to commit suicide. Of course, they're working with a psychiatrist, or they're having all these health ailments, or their marriage is basically they're headed for divorce. I wish they would come earlier, but they come at the dire straits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, people, the teacher appears when the student is ready, right? My last question for you, and by the way, guys, go to thinkunbrokenpodcast.com, look up Sophia's episode. You'll find all of this information and more in the show notes for her. My last question for you, my friend, what does it mean to you to be unbroken?
To actually feel joy and create to your full potential. That's what Unbroken is. You're not going to have joy 24/7, but to feel excited about living your life and connecting with people or creating something in your life, not to feel it as a drudgery. You're enjoying your life. You're connecting with this person. You're flowing. It just comes with ease. That's what it means, unbroken. And we can all have it, whatever it is we pick. Maybe you want, a partner. Maybe it's a business. So the successful people, Tony Robbins, he loves what he does. It's not work for him. He loves, and Dr. Joe loves what he does.
Great point. I absolutely love that. I think that if you're listening today and you're walking down this path of your life and you feel stuck, you feel lost, you feel like, man, there's something in Sophia's story that I resonate with, I encourage you, reach out. The whole point of this podcast is to put you in front of people who can help you transform your life. And this might be your sign. That said, Sophia, my friend, thank you so much for being here. Unbroken Nation, thank you guys for listening. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and until next time, my friends, be unbroken. I'll see you.
Most people don't realize how much their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making billions, pulling details about you from public records and the internet, and then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. It's why you get endless robocalls and why ads seem to follow you everywhere. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance, all backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might sell just credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of it, together, at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/remove. Protect yourself now at aura.com/remove.